When was the last time you heard a sermon from the book of Job? I can't tell you the last time I preached a sermon from the book of Job. In fact, it wasn't until seminary that I had even, confessing here, that I'd even really read all the way through the book of Job. It's one of those books of the Bible that we kind of get the gist of the story. You know, Job was a man who was very blessed. He goes through hard times. He struggles. His friends are no good. And then by the end, you know, things are put back together. It's like a movie that we've seen 100 times. And maybe that's why we don't read the book of Job all the way through. Excuse me. Job is a complex man. Job 1 opens with a basic description of who he is. Job was a wealthy and upstanding man. He was righteous. Basically, Job was your typical guy. He was a success story. He had done well in life. He made all the right decisions, made good money, worked hard. Everyone admired him, and he was a man of very deep faith in God. Kind of this model of who we all say that, you know, would want to be like. Job, we don't know this, might have even kind of had the same mentality that we do sometimes. I'm so successful, I've earned everything, I've done everything right. I can handle most anything. Except that's not how life works, is it? As self-sufficient as we think we are, there are moments in life that will knock us for a loop. I don't care how successful you are, how much money you've got, how resilient you think you are. There are moments, all of us, most of us in this room, I bet, have had at least some in our past, but there are moments that just shake you to your core. Shake you. As human beings, we don't like to come into contact with this reality that life has uncertainties. We don't like to touch on the truth, which is we all have moments in life that will just knock us for a loop. We want life to be predictable, right? I read a psychology article this week that said that biologically our brains are wired for certainty. We want certainty. Uncertainty, the article said, we avoid uncertainty like it's pain. You know, everything we do, we try to get away from it. Nobody wants to acknowledge uncertainty in life. We want everything to be predictable, right? You wake up, you know exactly what you're going to do, when you're going to do it, how you're going to do it, where you're going to do it, and you know how your day's going to go. And we want it to all be guaranteed. But that's the great guarantee that we have. Except every day we know that good people who've made good decisions and done life right, that they suffer. Every day good people get diagnoses out of the blue that changes their life. Every day good people are hit with the news of tragedy. Something unexpected happened. And what do? We want certainty in life. What do you do with uncertainty? Often, people of faith, the church especially, is even guilty of teaching what I call a doctrine of certainty. That certainty is something that becomes part of our teaching. Now, that can be done explicitly or implicitly. Explicitly, we would say the doctrine of certainty shows up in things like the prosperity gospel. Y'all ever heard of that? The prosperity gospel. It's the name it and claim it. You know, if I pray hard enough, God's going to give it to me. If I pray hard enough over this lottery ticket, then I'm going to win because God wants me to have money. You know the preachers who make lots of money doing this. The guy, I forget his name, he's on television or something. God wanted him to have a private jet, and the people had to give to this because this is what God wanted, and he named it and he wanted to claim it. The prosperity gospel is a doctrine of certainty. It says I can control the future if I just pray hard enough, if I just try hard enough. That's a doctrine of certainty. Now, for those of us who giggle and laugh at silly stuff like the prosperity gospel, we need to be careful because the truth is there's our own sort of doctrine of certainty that we all kind of observe, whether we realize it or not. Like the notion that, you know, whether we tell ourselves we think it, I've made good decisions in life. I've done everything the right way. Life should work out just fine and dandy for me. That's That's a doctrine of certainty that says I can somehow, through my good works, control the future. But what happens when uncertainty arises? What happens when that moment where we're knocked for a loop happens? What are we left with? Job lost everything. His wife, his children, his land, everything that was seemingly meaningful in his life was gone by the time we pick up in chapter 19 today. And with everything stripped away, and his skin diseased, and he's just everything. It's all gone. And underneath it all, Job turns to the last and best truth that he's ever known in his life. That beyond the money, beyond the fame, beyond the admiration of people, even beyond his own physical health in that moment, the last and best truth he knew. For I know that my Redeemer lives. And that when all of this is passed away, he will be standing with me and for me. And as awful as life is, there is nothing that can change that promise. And boy, a lot of things tried to change it for him. I love how the passage starts today. Job, we don't know, talking to himself or to somebody. Oh, that someone would write this down. Oh, that these words could be engraved forever. He's giving like what professors, maybe you've heard one of these, give a last lecture. You ever heard professors doing this? A last lecture, like a professor who's retiring, or maybe they do it at the end of the semester. But it's that last lecture where underneath all the head knowledge they're trying to give you, they tell you what's really important to them in life. I remember the story, maybe you do, of Randy Posh, who was a professor at Carnegie Mellon back in the early 2000s, I think. He was going to give a last lecture. He always did, except a few weeks before his last lecture, he got a diagnosis of pancreatic cancer. He was terminal, stage 4. There was no coming back from this. And that shaped his last lecture, you can imagine, in a big way. And he spent his time talking about having the joy of children that children have, and chasing your dreams, and doing things that give you meaning and purpose in life, and all these wonderful things, because underneath all of his head knowledge, Randy Posh knew that there was a depth of life that sometimes we don't acknowledge because we're too busy chasing achievements and fame and rewards and all this other stuff. But it was when all that got stripped away that he really knew what was most important in life. And that's what Job is doing here. Everything's stripped away, and yet he points to that which is the most fundamental truth, the mystery beyond all mysteries, that's so hard to conceptualize, and yet when you hit rock bottom, it is the foundation of your being. For I know that my Redeemer lives, and that when all of this is gone, he will be with me. As a disciple, I want to be like Job. I want to be like Randy Posh. But the question we have is, how can we at least move toward that before diagnoses and tragedy and all these other things happen? Like, what in our daily rhythms can we do, or take part in, or share to strengthen that foundation in our life, so that when those moments happen and everything is turned upside down, we can touch more clearly that truth that our Redeemer lives. We just concluded our Alpha class. This is a new intro to discipleship class that I'm developing here in the life of the church, and almost 20 people, came to some piece of it in one of the 3 weeks at least. But it was really a great kind of starter class, and I enjoyed doing it. We're going to offer it again, by the way, if it's something that you'd be interested in. And it's not just for people new to the church, although new folks is really good for you to do this, but it's for everybody. And that Alpha class, it's not a new member class. And one of the things that we talked about a lot is it's not just about being busy at the church, because that's not where you find purpose and meaning, is just being busy at the church. But it's about engaging your faith in a deep way. It's about seeking to become a deep disciple of Jesus Christ. Here at Trinity Church, for those who may not know, our strategy for how we want to be church is to create a space for people to belong and become deeper disciples of Jesus. Because our ultimate vision is that we want to build a community, diverse and inclusive community of people who live in love like Christ. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens on purpose. And so we talk about ways to grow in our faith, to engage in our discipleship. And you'll hear more about this. But for today, the way that you on a daily basis engage your faith, that's strengthening that foundation for when life's worst moments happen. That's engaging in a way that changes you slowly but surely and mysteriously over time to see the world in different ways. To have the resolve to see life's worst moments and to take them in stride and to know that your Redeemer lives. Got to thinking this week, I'd forgotten, I pulled out some old stuff I'd written. My friend Al's a patient. While I was in seminary, I spent a year as a chaplaincy intern, and I worked at Wesley Woods Hospital. For those who aren't familiar, Wesley Woods is the geriatric hospital of the big Emory University complex. You know, they got 50 hospitals up there, but it was specifically for older adults, and they had a range of care, and so I spent time in the various areas. Al was a Jewish man from New York, and he had broken his hip, and he was in rehab, and then unfortunately he had gotten a diagnosis that he had throat cancer. It was stage 4 and he was terminal. And so he's at Wesley Woods recovering from his hip surgery as best he can, but really he was there to die. And I remember I'd go visit Al, when I'd go in there a couple times a week. And for whatever reason, I'd always show up around lunchtime. So Al started calling me his lunch appointment. And I said, I don't want to bother you while you eat. Oh, no. I miss having lunch meetings from when I used to work. And so we'd be a lunch meeting whenever I'd stop by. And we'd talk about life and faith and family and things like that. He was Jewish, I was Christian. And, we made lots of jokes back and forth about that. Back then, I ran a lot more than I run now. I ran half marathons and things, and I told Al how much I loved running, and he told me about this deli that he would go to in New York City every year during the marathon and watch the runners go by. And I told him how great it would be to one day run the New York City Marathon and to run by and to see him at that deli. And we laughed because we knew it wasn't going to happen, but it was nice to think of. Al was a deep man of faith. And I remember there at the very end, I showed up one day and things had really taken a turn for the worse. And I walk in the room and there was his sister who I'd known. She would always leave though whenever I'd come around so we could talk. And her daughter, his niece, was there. And I said, "It's getting close, isn't it?" And she said, "Yeah." By this time, Al couldn't talk anymore. The throat cancer had taken that ability from him. And so I go in and asked to pray. And before I pray, I made some joke. And I wish that I could even remember the joke. But I'll never forget looking down in that bed. And here's Al and dying. I mean, it's just, and I'm just this snot-nosed, green, wet behind the ears seminary student who knows nothing about ministry, trying to do the best I can. And I remember asking him for some reason, "How are you doing?" He's dying, right? He couldn't speak, but he looked up at me and he gave me a wink. What an incredible moment, though. I'm there to minister, and he's ministering to me on what it means to know even in that moment that your Redeemer lives. And he wasn't afraid. It was awful what he was going through, but he wasn't so afraid. I want to have faith like Al. I want to be the kind of disciple that when that moment presents itself, I can know, even in the mystery of what knowing means, that my Redeemer is there with me. To see the world in different ways because of faith is the duty of a disciple. And it's our delight to grow to see the world in different ways. C.S. Lewis, I probably quoted this a million times, one of my favorite quotes. He said, "I believe in Christianity." He believes in his faith like he believes in the sun rising. Not just because he sees it, but that by it he sees everything else. to have our faith illumine our lives in ways that we see the world in different ways. We don't have to be so afraid of all the bad news that's out there. We don't have to be so angry about whatever it is we don't agree with. We don't have to be so worked up over whatever it is on TV that they're telling us is just going to happen at a moment's notice. And it's not that we don't care, but it's that we're not consumed with fear. For we know that our Redeemer lives. One of my favorite quotes on this mystery of life and faith, Frederick Buechner, and I wrote it down even because Buechner's so wonderful. I want to make sure I got it right. In the last analysis, Buechner says, "You cannot pontificate, but only point. A Christian is one who points at Christ and says, I can't prove a thing, but there's something about his eyes and his voice. There's something about the way he carries his head, his hands, the way he carries his cross, the way he carries me." I can't give you what discipleship looks like in a neat and compact formula. We can point you to different things that kind of take you on a journey, but that journey is yours in a unique way, individually. And then together we bring our individual journeys as a community of faith. But as we worship, as we pray, as we study, as we serve, as we give, and as we share our faith, these are the things that change us and shape us and form us and reform us. And by some amazing mystery of God's love, when the worst moments of life present themselves, we walk in the light of this faith, even when we can't see. For we know that our Redeemer lives. Thanks be to God.